So there are some people freaking out online right now, worried that the Caribena versicolor will no longer be available in the hobby. Well, I reached out to some of my contacts that are in the know when it comes to this type of information and got all the details that I'm going to pass along to you so you know exactly what is going on. Now first, let's discuss the different types of legislation or organizations that can regulate the sale and importation of exotic animals. The first is the ESA, or the Endangered Species Act. This is what applies to the Sri Lankan Poecilotheria species that makes it nearly impossible to have them imported into the country or sold across state lines unless you're a zoo or a university. Essentially, they are trying to protect endangered or threatened species in the wild by making their availability and transferability within the pet trade or in between private citizens as difficult as possible, or just impossible. But that's not what's going on with the Caribena versicolor. Then we have the Lacey Act, which is legislation here in the United States that regulates which species you can import into the country. Essentially what's legal or not legal to own, sell, all that kind of stuff. I've posted a few videos in the past about the Lacey Act and its implications on the tarantula hobby. And organizations like USARK fight tooth and nail, lobbying on the national, state, and local levels to protect exotic pet keepers like ourselves from becoming victims of this overreach in legislation. But the Lacey Act has nothing to do with the situation with the Caribena versicolor either. What's happened recently is the Caribena versicolor has been added to the Appendix III of CITES. Now CITES, C-I-T-E-S, stands for the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. And it's essentially a treaty between multiple countries to protect endangered plants and animals from the threats of international trade. There are a lot of species that we keep here in the United States that are already protected by CITES and are listed under Appendix II. For instance, there are some Brachypelma species and Poecilotheria species. But again, the Sri Lankan species are protected under the Endangered Species Act. For an animal to be added to Appendix II of CITES requires everyone on the board to discuss it, vote on it, and add it to the list. But for Appendix III, the country that animal is endemic to simply needs to submit a request to CITES asking this animal be protected and prove that there is a threat to it being collected in the wild and sold in the pet trade, or other issues such as deforestation, habitat destruction, stuff like that. This is the case with the Caribena versicolor. Towards the end of October, the paperwork was submitted to CITES requesting protective status on the Caribena versicolor, which they accepted, and it will go into effect 90 days after the approval, which is like early January. It seems some people online saw that this had happened and jumped to the conclusion that this was the type of ban you would see with the Lacey Act or with the Endangered Species Act. I read the paper that was released and it's full of legal jargon and kind of hard to understand. So I reached out to a couple of importers in the tarantula hobby, as well as a few dealers, and got their thoughts and experiences. And I asked them to translate and explain to me what does this mean in layman's terms. And the overwhelming response is that essentially it's not something we need to worry about. It's not really going to change or affect anything that we do here in the United States or pretty much anywhere in the world. The biggest change will be for dealers that import the species into the United States. They'll just be required to have a specific permit for that individual species to make it legal for them to import. That way it's much closely monitored and could possibly help protect the species in the wild. But as far as the Caribena versicolors that are already here in the country, their legal status will not change. People can still breed them, you can still sell them across state lines. The only thing this affects is trying to import the species into the United States. Essentially, you have to prove that these weren't ripped out of the wild, which really isn't a bad thing because we don't want to be buying wild-caught tarantulas, especially a species that's so well established in the hobby all over the world. So what I'm saying is that this really isn't anything to freak out about. If you're a dealer or an importer of tarantulas, it's probably going to be an added headache, more red tape to get through, and that sucks, I understand. But for most of us that are just regular tarantula keepers, this is not going to affect us at all. We're really not going to see any difference. But the overwhelming sentiment I got from everyone that I reached out to is that the Endangered Species Act and the CITES regulations are not what we should be worried about. What we should be concerned about is the Lacey Act amendments that are still being worked on and trying to be pushed through on a federal level. We've already discussed in past videos the legal implications of Brazilian species being imported into the US. And though USARK has fought and won many cases, and most recently, as a community, we were able to contact our representatives and convince them to drop the Lacey Act amendment in the last bill that was passed. That doesn't mean that the forces out there that want to heavily regulate the tarantula hobby have given up. Now, instead of just wanting to regulate Brazilian species, they're also looking to regulate species coming from Colombia, Venezuela, Costa Rica, Panama, Yemen, and many other locations. A lot of these species are already in the United States and have been bred in captivity for many generations. They're well-established tarantulas that many people keep as pets because they're very popular. If these Lacey Act amendments were to get passed, not only would we not be able to import those species into the US, but it could also make it very difficult or even impossible to sell them online or ship them across state lines. So even though the Caribena versicolor being listed in Appendix III of CITES really isn't that big of a deal, it doesn't mean we should let our guard down. We need to remain vigilant, keep our eyes and ears open, and come together as a community, not just as tarantula keepers or arachnid keepers, but exotic pet keepers as a whole, and continue to fight the government overreach regarding exotic animals and responsible pet keeping that these Lacey Act amendments keep trying to push through. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the USARK YouTube channel. Become a member on their website. Even if you can't afford to become a member, still subscribe to their YouTube channel and follow them on all their social media platforms. If for no other reason, when they go to Washington and are lobbying senators and representatives, they can show them their social media and the immense amount of people that are following them as an example of how many people like us are out there that are supporting USARK and are responsible pet keepers that want what's best for the animals, both in captivity and in the wild. So I'll link USARK's YouTube channel right here and put other links to their website and social medias down below in the description. I'll even leave a link to the PDF regarding CITES and the Caribena versicolor if you want to dive a little bit deeper. As always, I appreciate you watching. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for buying Tarantula Collective merchandise, and I will see you next Tuesday.